All right, we'll get started. I want to welcome everybody who's able to join us today, and those of you who are going to be watching remotely after the fact. Thanks for joining us for a webinar today that we're going to focus on reporting in Counterpoint. A couple of housekeeping things. First, we are able to get questions as we go through the webinar. If you bring your cursor to the bottom of your screen, you'll have an opportunity to add there's a Q&A box that will open up and you can ask questions there. We'll try to answer questions as much as we can, and certainly if there's something we can address during the webinar, maybe it's really specific to your business, we'll definitely follow up afterwards with you. One more housekeeping, we'll be doing a recording of this and making it available. So shortly after the webinar is completed, you should receive an email with a link on where to find this recording. So let's get started. I want to thank you again. My name is Andy Smith. I am Business Development Manager for Rapid. And joining me today is Bart McCleskey, our President.
Hello, everybody.
So we're going to dig into reports. This is unlike all the ones we've been doing so far, webinars we've been doing so far. This is going to be an hour. We've got a lot of content to present. We think that there's a lot of information that we can help convey to you that'll improve your use of Counterpoint. We're going to talk about things first, just some foundational ideas about reporting, some terminology that's used in reporting, and then we'll talk about some fundamental skills, some really good tools for how you work with reports and get accurate reports out of the system. Next thing, Bart's going to cover a whole bunch of information about the right reports, you know, what we consider some of the best reports in different areas of Counterpoint. After that, we'll just quickly touch on a couple of other report adjacent tools, things that are related to reports or that might make using reports easier. We'll have time for questions and then talk about next steps. Now, reporting in Counterpoint, we rely on a tool called Crystal Reports to do our report generation. Crystal Reports is a very popular platform. It's used with lots of different databases to do report generation. Nice thing about Crystal Reports, it's very flexible, it's easy to customize. A programmer who has a copy of Crystal Reports could create custom reports for you, whether that's someone from Rapid's programming staff or your own programmers. It does require some degree of programming skill to create a custom report, but certainly an open, accessible tool for generating reporting. Now, out of the box, you get 200 standard reports in Counterpoint, and each one of those reports can be heavily configured and tailored. So even within a single report, it's not uncommon to see 5, 6, even 10 meaningful reports that you could generate from that one report. Really kind of gives you an infinite number of variations of reports, and that can be both a really good thing, but it can also be very intimidating. One of the things we hope to accomplish in today's webinar is to give you some tools so that it's less intimidating. I'm hearing somebody's audio skipping around. Bart, am I sounding okay on our side? Is it
yeah, you're coming through loud and clear
okay.
with me.
So yeah, Leanne, I think that's your connection. So I apologize. It should be fine on the video though. So first thing, where do you find reports in Counterpoint? They don't put them all in one place. They actually kind of pepper the reports through into the logical buckets along with all the other functionality as it's sorted on the main menu. So you'll have one area of reports for inventory, another for point of sale, another for sales history. If you go to the main menu, you're going to find a report subfolder in each of the primary folders. When you hit that report subfolder, all the reports would appear in the white space. And sometimes you might even see subfolders underneath the reports folder, one often for history and one for journals. Just to explain what those mean, history reports are showing data from one or more posted events in the past. So actually a great way to look at multiple posted events over a period of time. A journal report would only focus on a single posted event. Because you can generate a history report and only focus on one event, like a end of day posting within the history reports, you don't often go to the journal reports. You know, they have unique needs at times, but they're not often used. Now, many reports, including journal and history reports, only show posted transactions. So it's good to know when I run this report, this is what I'm looking at. There are other reports, for example, in your point of sale section, there's a report called Unposted Sales Analysis Report. That would show all the sales for today that didn't get posted because you haven't posted your drawer yet. Just knowing that the information you're showing is including posted or non-posted will help you understand why your data is presenting the way it is. Now, there's some fundamental skills that we're going to go through that will help you understand and utilize reports and be able to get better, richer data out of your reports. So first thing we're going to cover is just making a report a favorite. That's easy. We'll show you that in the system. Also kind of saving parameters. Once you go through a report and set it up the way you like it, there's a way that you can save it and recall it over and over again. So you don't have to go through that trouble of setting up the queries and things more than once. We're going to go into detail about how do you create a query or how do you filter the report to select the data that you want to report on, and then also what columns of data you show about that in the report that you're looking to get. Finally, you preview that report and possibly even export it to other tools. And then I'm going to show you at the end how you can even create a special button on the screen just to run one tailored report exactly for the way that you like it. Let's just jump into a few of those things, and I'm going to hop over to my Counterpoint demo to show you that. So we're looking at the main menu in Counterpoint, and the first thing I want to show you is kind of that you can make reports your favorites. On the home page, across the middle, you have 15 available slots that you can make favorites, and I've got quite a few of my reports: sales analysis by group, sales history by item, by customer, reports that I like to run all the time during my demos. So you want to make something a favorite in your system, just go to that function anywhere and click the star in the upper right corner. It would bring it down into this favorite line. When you're working with favorites, another nice trick up in the upper right here, the star allows you to rearrange those favorites in the order that you want to see them. You just drag and drop it in the order that you want. That favorites capability applies to really any function in Counterpoint, but it's certainly a nice way to bring the reports that you need up to the top of the screen. So the next thing we're going to talk about is saving and loading parameters. So I'm going to use as an example here, I'm going to go into my sales history flash sales report. So I'm just going to the reports subfolder of sales history and selecting flash sales report. This is a very simple report. It's kind of a nice one to use as an example because it's not clouded with lots of variables. It's really reporting the activity of a store kind of at the highest level. So there's really two steps to working with reports. You kind of define the data that's going to be pulled, like what records specifically you're going to pull up and show on the report, and then you're going to say, well, what columns of data do I want to show about those records? You'll see both of those as we talk through this. But first thing I want to say is as you go through this, and let's say you set this up the way you like, I spend time defining my time period, defining how I want it ordered, adding filters and defining the columns. We'll go through a lot of that in a second. Once you do that, you can kind of save the parameters of this report and allows you to give it a unique name. This is my demo example, and it'll save it, and I can load that over and over again without having to reconfigure everything. In the future, if I want to run that specific version of the report, I can load parameters, and you'll see flash demo example misspelled is right there and available to load. And that would load this specific parameter for me.
Hey, Andy, so now, I think something worth mentioning, particularly for those who are listening and have multiple stores, and if you work in just one store or the other store, that's a great feature to be able to just say, hey, every time that I pull up this report, I want to pull up my parameters where it's already filtered to store 101 instead of store 102.
Exactly. And even when you do that, it doesn't mean you can't go and continue to change it. For example, I could load this parameter, but now I want to change the dates and run it for last year instead of year to date. It's very easy to do that. And it's not changing the saved one. It's just changing this particular iteration. So it's a great way to kind of baseline your report.
Perfect.
All right. Well, so now, when we start to work with reports on a deeper level, you really are performing two functions. As I said, you're kind of talking about, well, what items, what records do I want to show on the report? And we do that with query or filtering. And then the next thing is, what columns of information do I show about each record? When you get to querying, as you look at any report, they all kind of have some similar layouts. First, there's tabs across the top here that take you to different pages of the parameter settings that you can have for this report. And the first one is usually parameters. These are not flexible. They're defined based on this specific report, and sometimes they're dynamic. For example, as you make changes in certain selections, it might change some of the other parameters that are available. Just notice that things will come on or off the screen. You don't have a lot of control on the top screen, but this is definitely where you set things like the period of time you want to focus on. So in this case, I'm looking at year to date. It could, where you set the order of the records. I want the orders, if I had multiple stores, it would order them by store. You could have others, I want to see my most profitable store first, or I want to see the store that's has the highest cost first. It's just a way to kind of sort them out. Now you get more specific as you go into the other tabs. I'm going to skip select columns for a second because that's what we'll talk about next. But as we're trying to define a query, you see each tab has different things. So this all deals with the ticket history. Maybe I want to focus on one specific drawer, or on one specific ticket date that I want to have this report focus on. When we get to the ticket lines, I could say I only want to look at information where this category or subcategory is involved. So you're narrowing down the records that it's pulling up, only the ones that relate to selling this specific item or category or subcategory, or only want to look at things where the primary vendor is this. We're going to talk now about a really fundamental skill that you'll use across Counterpoint. And that is that when you look at these screens and you see these fields, these are not limitations. This is just the simple view of all the possible records. We've just cherry-picked a few of them for you to see. Let me show you something. If you right button click in the white space here, you'll see a whole bunch of options. But if you go down to customize, pretty much the entire database related to items becomes open to you. If I click on add another line, this is just a more detailed view of this, but I can select any of these fields of data to add to my query or filter. You can see it's almost staggering how many different things that you might want to do. And in this case, I might want to start with something like, I only want to look at things that are paid with points. So I want to only look at my sales history when someone's used their loyalty points to pay for it. And I can say, for example, is not empty, or is empty would be not points, or is not empty would be that they actually use points on that ticket. Now when you run a preview, we say preview to look at the results of that, it's going to show you how those records show up. Now, before you print the report, you might want to run a preview just to check and see if it's making sense. So this is saying, I basically had sales $29,000 up to date where someone used points on the ticket to pay for those transactions. And it tells me my number of tickets and my average ticket. So that's filtering out the records. Now, when you've gone and created this, if I go back, right button click, it'll take me down, instead of customize, it says simplify. And now you'll see that new parameter has been added to this. You can do this and dynamically change this, change the query and filters that you're setting on pretty much every tab other than the first two. You set up a query, you're looking for the records that you want to see. Let's talk about then how do you decide what columns of data you're looking at for each of those records? And that's where the select columns comes in. Now, sometimes on some reports, we'll look at a couple later, there's information right here at the top where you might have some predefined reports that automatically set up the columns that you're seeing. Those are great, but in most reports, you also have the ability to select the columns. This will vary report by report. Sometimes you only see the option of having 6 or 7 columns of data shown. Sometimes you'll see 100 different bits of information that you can show on a report. So for this specific report, I'm right now showing sales, dollars profit, percentage profit, the number of tickets and average ticket. But if I wanted to add cost to that, I could just come over here and move it over to that column. And now when I preview this report, you'll see the cost field has been added in. As you work with reports, I kind of give people good guidance. Even if your report can handle, for example, 11, 12 columns, 10 columns, you might want to stick to around 7 or 6 columns. It fits nicely on one page without having to wrap the data into 2 lines per item. So it's a good guideline for you. Now, when you preview a report, you've selected it, you've identified the data that you want to see. When you preview a report, you can actually export this information and export it into other tools. So I absolutely could print it right now. I could email it right now. That's pretty standard, but I also might want to export it. This little mail icon here would allow me to export. And I can choose all different formats for exporting this report. Send it out in Microsoft Excel, be able to manipulate that data in other forms, or even CSV if I want to take it in an unstructured Excel spreadsheet. You can bring it out in certainly a PDF to send an email to others. You can also put it in Word if I'm going to write or include this information into a business report or proposal. Real easy to do that. So any of the reports that you're generating with Counterpoint can be exported in all of those formats. Now, maybe you updated this and I wanted to include that cost. I wanted to include that parameter that I added about the points being paid, and I want to use that and add it to my the saved thing here. I can come back in and save parameters. I can use that same demo example and save again, and it'll just replace the one I had done before. And now it'll remember those parameters the next time I load it.
Hey, Andy, can we go back in there just one quick second more?
Sure.
On the save parameters. One little thing that I wanted to point out that's really important is that little check mark where it says default parameters. That default is global, and so if you save a set of parameters with a certain filter criteria and make it the default, that means everyone will now get that default, and that may not be what they expect. And then you can see you can also choose whether or not to make it public. So if you uncheck that public button, then that means only you'll be able to see this particular filter criteria. But in many cases, it is a good idea to make things public because your filter criteria may be something that's very valuable to someone else in your company. Just be careful with default. That's the point.
Great point. Now, you go through and you set up reports, and again, loading parameters, all of that can seem a little bit intimidating, but once you go and set them up and you've defined some of those saved versions, there's some things that you can do to make it easier for the rest of your team to access that report. Let's say you do want to make that a public report. I'm going to show you now how, just like you see buttons here on the screen, how you might create a button for a report. And I've got a couple here. I have a folder in the bottom called Common Reports that I set up, and this is where you can actually create some of your unique saved versions of reports. Andy's inventory performance, this is a merchandise analysis report that I just fixed the way I wanted to. You can see it pops up merchandise analysis, but it's using the configuration and layout that I saved for that. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do that. I think it's a really valuable skill to have. I'm just going to go into menu codes, which is the tool. Let's type menu. So menu codes is under setup system. And so I'm just going to select that. Now a menu code is set up for each security level. So right now I'm going to actually set up the menu code for my system admin. And I'm going to go into menu editor. You'd have to do this if you wanted this report to be visible by all the members of your team. You'd have to do the same function for each security level. It's really not hard though. So as you can see, this is the menu that I show right now, and on the very bottom, that custom reports, these are those ones I just showed you that I already have in there. I'm going to actually take a standard report from over here and drag it in to that folder. So from my default menu, I can go into my sales history, and you see the reports. And we have that flash sales report we were just working with. I'm actually going to drag that over into my common reports, and you see it added it right here. Well, now I can call this whatever I want to. I'm going to use it as my example report. And I actually change it in all three places. This is just going to be what the button reads when it shows up on the screen. And down here, this is a really important column. This is where you define which of the saved versions. So you can see my demo example was the one I saved. I want to run that one when I push this button. And now when I close this and save it, it's going to add that extra button to that screen. I can close menu codes out. If I go back into common reports, I see the example report, and this will launch the exact version of that report that I had configured. Remember that it's year to date. Remember that it's showing the costs that we added, and it's even showing that only paid with loyalty points. So it's remembered all of those things and now tied it to an easy to find version of that report.
That's cool.
Now I'm going to bounce it back to Bart for the next couple of minutes.
All right, thanks, Andy. So, Andy just went through some fundamentals that apply to most any report. So he didn't dive yet into any specific report because he wanted to give you those skills that you can use to use with any report. I'm going to dive into some individual reports, but before I do that, I want to make sure that you're aware that there is a handbook out there that lists all 200 of Counterpoint's reports that you can use, and we provide a link for it here. Now, it doesn't really go through all the configurable options for each one of these reports, and so that's why Andy's presentation thus far was really important about how to set all of those configuration variables. But it's a pretty good handbook. Included in it in the table of contents is one of my favorite sections where it just lists everything out. Sometimes just being able to see all the reports and their names makes it so much easier to find what you're looking for. And this little key symbol, I know it's a little bit hard to read here on this screen, but this little key symbol means that that's a key report. That's one that a lot of people like. And so be sure that you have run those reports and know what they look like. And speaking of keys, that's what I'm going to go through now. What are the most used Counterpoint reports? And we're going to break these down by section. You remember when Andy said that under point of sale, there's then reports and then history. Under inventory, there's reports and history. Under purchasing, same thing. So we're going to look through several different reports in each of these areas. And this little section of this presentation, you might want to print out and use as a reference, because I'm going to give you the report name and the path that you use to find it, as well as some suggestions on what you use that report for and the configurations that you ought to set so that you make that report meaningful. It's not always the best to just say, run this report for everything. Many times what makes it meaningful and valuable is to filter it so that you can focus in. Now I'm going to talk about 13 reports, but what I'm talking about in these 13 reports can be leveraged so that you use all 200 reports in a better fashion. So let's start first with point of sale reports. One of the reports that almost everyone uses is drawer history. And most of the time when we use it, we think of it in the context of a particular drawer session of being able to say, hey, was that particular drawer over and short? But I'm going to show you a way that you can use that same report to get your tenders for an entire month. And so it's just using this report that you may be really, really familiar with, but find that you can use it in a different way that gives you information you didn't know that you could obtain. Ticket history is a really common report. This is where you can say, let me see everything that I sold between 9 a.m. and noon today. Let me see each one of those tickets, including knowing who the customer is and what are the items that they purchased. So be aware that that's a really good report to use. And lastly, I'll mention point of sale exceptions. This is a report where you're able to identify fraud. You can see which of my cashiers are ringing a lot of voids, which of my cashiers have a higher number of return lines. And these don't always say for sure there's fraud going on, but they sure are indications that there's potential for it. But let's take a look at the drawer summary history report. And again, you're used to seeing this by session, but when I configured this report, I said I only want it to show totals, and I want it to run for the month of May, except I accidentally left off the last day of the month. At any rate, what you can see is that I'm seeing my entire sales for the month and my returns, all of my non-merchandise transactions, for example, how many gift cards that I sold and how many order deposits did I receive, and as well the sum total of all my tenders. So I know, for instance, that in the entire month I took $575,000 worth of debit. Now, you can see it also shows the sum of the over and short. Boy, my example data has a problem here. I certainly hope none of you ever are $107,000 under on your drawer count, else there's big problems. But you get the general idea. This is a sum for the total of the month. And the way that I did this is in this bottom section when you configure the report, I said that I only want to see report totals. Now I could have, if I had multiple stores, maybe I wouldn't have checked on report totals, but I wanted to see it by store totals. And of course you can do it by drawer if you're doing it for just a couple days and you want to see each of the individual drawers. But then I had to use my events tab. That's where I set my dates to say that I only wanted this to include the month of May. So good report. Now let's move on to inventory reports. So all of these would be found under the inventory button, and then reports or inventory. Well, I don't have any that I suggested here for inventory history. All of these are under inventory reports. Merchandise analysis. Andy mentioned it earlier. This is the most powerful report in Counterpoint. You need to spend some time learning how to use this report because it's what allows you to see overstock and understock, to compare performances across categories, evaluate promotional effectiveness. It is the granddaddy of them all here. We had an entire webinar that was devoted exclusively to this report that we did earlier. Go back and watch it and spend some time learning to run it. Since we have a whole webinar, I'm not going to focus on it today, but I do want to mention a couple of others that I think are important. One of the common things that our help desk get is that someone will call up and say, "Hey, I don't know why this inventory is so wrong on this particular item. What's going on?" Well, the best way to find that out is to go to the inventory history report because it will show you by date, by transaction, everything that occurred that affected that items on hand. Excuse me, and that will of course allow you to see when the mistake occurred. And most likely what you'll find is that someone was keying in a receiver and they accidentally typed in 300 when they intended to only type in 30, or some other fat finger mistake like that along the way. 6-week and 12-month reports. These reports can be a little bit of intimidating because they have a whole lot of data on them. The 6-week report is an excellent report for evaluating what you should do to make sure you're in stock and planning your reorders for fast-moving items. For slow-moving items, staple items that you carry all the time, all throughout the year, the 12-month report is going to be a much better report. And so use those, and let's just dive just a little bit deeper into the 6-week report. And so on this, as I say, it can be a little bit intimidating when you look at it, but let's break it down and you'll find that it's not nearly as difficult as you might think. So the top headings refer to what's right below them. So there's our item number and our item description, and we can even see what our markup is on this particular item, that we've got a 32% markup. Then we come in with another set of headings. And so it's saying we're looking at the last 26 weeks worth of receiving, that we've received 90 in the last 26 weeks, and that the current quantity on hand is 23 and the current on order is 0. Now, as we look across, you can see that this shows us for each of the last 6 weeks what our sales were. So I can say, okay, it looks like in general we're selling somewhere around 5 or 6 on average per month, per week. Whoops, sorry about that. Then as I get to the right, what I can know based upon this sales period, this 6-week sales period, if I've got 23 on hand, then the number of weeks of supply that I have is going to be about 8.9 weeks. So this works really well for taking your fast moving items and saying, do I have enough stock on hand? Now, another example Andy likes to use, and I think it's really smart too, is you don't have to do these last 6 weeks for just the previous 6 weeks. We could have looked at the last 6 weeks for this year, this time last year. And so let's say that that we're a garden center and we sell poinsettias. We might want to look and see what it is over that Christmas period, how many we sold each month, and say, okay, well, this is the number that I want to order in towards the end of October, and then somewhere in November, here's how much more I'm going to order to cover to cover those next 3 weeks, so that you're timing your merchandise falling at the right time. And so run this for a particular item, a particular fast-moving item. Run this for a category of fast-moving items to take a look at what your weeks on hand. Those are the primary uses for this 6 weeks report. How did I configure this one? Well, on the parameters tab is where I set my date period, whether I wanted it to be last year for this month or for the last 6 weeks, the current date for the last 6 weeks. And then I came over to this tab and I set my quantity on hand to say at least 20, because I know if I have 20 on hand that this is very likely a fast moving item and I want to filter to only see those fast-moving items. So those might not be exactly what you want to set on yours, but it gives you an idea of how we're using the filtering on this tab as well as the parameters tab in order to generate this report exactly how we want it to look. Purchasing reports, let's move on. Receiving history is a really common report for people to take a look at. How much did I receive? How much did I order from this vendor last month, in this year, last month, in this month, last year? And purchasing advice report is really, it's kind of a funny name. A more common name that you may hear for this is replenishment. And we'll take a look at it. We think we're going to create a whole webinar on this, but we know people are interested, so I wanted to give you just a taste of what purchasing advice looks like. So in this case, I configured the purchasing advice report to give me days of supply, meaning I want to have 45 days of supply. And then I also told it the sales period that I wanted it to use to evaluate. So what it did is it said, let me calculate on average how much I sell per day using this sales period, and let me multiply that by whatever that average per day is by 45 days, and that is what I'm going to suggest that you need, but I can back out from that whatever you have on hand. And so in this particular items case, you can see I've got 1 on hand, that I sold 8 during this period here. And so in order to have 45 days worth of supply, I need to purchase another 5. There's more that, and days of supply is just one method. There's a replenishment method. There is a min-max method. There's lots of ways to use this report, but this is where you use the system to suggest what it is that you need to get on hand to satisfy the demand that you're currently seeing.
You know, Bart, I might even add with that, one of the nice things about that replenishment report is right from it, you can generate a purchase order. So for our customers who do purchase orders, this will actually generate a purchase request right from the report. It'll default it to either your primary or lowest cost vendor. Let you go in and make edits to that before you post that purchase order.
Perfect. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Most use sales history reports. Sales history is, it is the lifeblood of that type of reporting is the lifeblood for any reporter, any retailer is what I'm trying to say. And flash sales, that was what Andy used when he was giving you some examples today. And so flash sales is a really easy report to run, and just to quickly say, hey, what were my sales? What were my profits? What were my number of tickets? What were my average ticket? Use flash sales to do that, and it's easy to filter that down to say I only want to see a one particular store, or if maybe I'm the buyer for only 2 categories, I can filter that report so that it only shows my 2 categories. Sales analysis by group is what I call the slice and dice report. In retail, we like to slice and dice, and so this report has over 40 different ways that you can group it, so that you can see your sales or other data in those different groupings. And let me give you a few examples of what I mean by that. I could group it by hour of day. And by doing that, I'm able to say, hey, what are my low selling hours and high selling hours, so that I can adjust my staffing and the breaks that I let my staff take according to hour of the day. Similarly, I could do it day of week. How much more is Saturday really compared to Wednesday? And what kind of impact should that have on my store staffing? I can do it by customer category or customer zip. Zip code lets me know where I ought to focus my advertising. How far outside of the 3-mile radius from my store do I have customers coming in? And I can even group this by primary vendor, and that really gives me a vision of which vendors are profitable, which ones are not, and if they're not profitable, can I renegotiate or should I cull those vendors? So it's a really, really powerful report. You want to learn to use this bad boy, because of all this flexibility and the grouping that you have available to you. So here's an example of a report that I ran that grouped by hour. I also sorted it, I ranked it by hour, and in this demo data that we had, the 4 o'clock, for at least the time period that I ran, which was from the first of the year to 6/1, 4 to 5 p.m. was my busiest time. it captured 13% of my total sales, and that was my #1 hour. My second best hour was 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., et cetera, all the way down to you could see the full report, you'd be able to see our lowest hour. Now, the interesting little trick that I did on this, though, what is your busiest hour can differ day by day. And so for this particular run of this report, I filtered it so that the day of week was Tuesday. And so this is saying, although I'm using this entire sales period, I'm only looking at Tuesday and I'm grouping it by my hours. So what I'm hoping you're seeing from this is all the flexibility. When you combine all the filtering capability with all this grouping capability, you can really slice and dice and learn things that help you manage your store more effectively. So let's take a look at some of the setup that I did on this. Like I said, I went to this ticket history tab and I filtered it so that the day of week was only Tuesday. I told it that I wanted to group it by hour. I told it that I want to print all of them and that I want to print it in order by sales. I could have grouped it by hour where it'd be 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 p.m., but I chose instead to say, no, I want to print it by sales so that I see all of those first. So that's a little bit of how you would configure the sales history report. I think that's the end of going through the most common reports. Again, I went through that quickly, so take a look at those other slides. Go in and mess with these common reports if you're not already familiar with them, and for sure get better at setting your filters so that you can dive a level deeper than just saying show me everything for the whole store. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Andy.
All right. Let's see here. I'm actually going to bounce back over to our demo for one quick second. And one thing we didn't really talk about, but Bart raised it, and I think it's worth kind of pointing out, is the different, we talked about grouping and ranking, and so there's some concepts in the different forms, and I'm bringing up merchandise analysis. It's that kind of super report that Bart mentioned, because this one really deals with all of them. You'll see here that you have group by, rank by, order by, and those can be a little bit confusing. Just thought it'd be a little bit helpful to give you some definitions for those. So rank is how you want to see things presented. So I want to rank it by the quantities sold, and I want to show either all, or I might want to show only my top 10 or my top 500 items in the system. I can rank it differently. Instead of quantity sold, I could do it based on ones with the highest profit percentage, and then it's going to show me my 500 highest profitable items. So rank is defining which things you're showing and how many of them in that specific case. Now group is really clustering the results into defined segments. So for example, group by primary vendor, group by category, subcategory. In this case, there's no group, but I could select vendor, vendor category, category, subcategory. It's just a way of moving the data so that they're clustering different results together. Order becomes once you were looking at the records, how do they appear one after the other? So in this case, we're ordering by rank. So if my rank is by the quantity sold, it'll show my highest quantity sold first and the lowest quantity sold last. Hopefully that helps. I'm going to now go into a couple of other alternative things that are kind of report adjacent. Let me just open up my PowerPoint here. There we go. So there we go. So there's some other reporting capabilities. The first one I want to talk about is called views. And views are very similar to reports. It uses a lot of the same skill sets that you would use in working with reports, but it actually just puts data on the screen. Also, we're going to talk about an alternative to reporting, kind of the next generation of reporting, which is business information, seeing your data visually on a dashboard. And the last thing I'm just going to make mention of, there's some capabilities that you can add onto the system that allow reports to get automatically generated and distributed. Some of our customers use that. I want to speak to it so you're all aware of it. So let's talk first about views. So just like you saw the folders and subfolders for reports, in this case, you actually have another subfolder called views. And in the case of inventory, you actually have a couple of different views, but one that's really popular is this view inventory detail. Think of a view as the same thing as a report, except you're only seeing it on the screen. You're not generating it in printed document. We'll talk later about how you can export this information into other tools like Excel, but for now, the view what I want to show you is kind of its capability to show data on the screen for you. This inventory detail view is actually really, really powerful for two reasons. Number one, you get all the same configurable query just like you can in reports. You can use that right button click and add additional parameters to this and really sort out a subsection of your inventory that you want to focus on. The next thing you can do is actually define the columns that you want to see. And it's really got a broad number of columns where many reports are limited in the number of columns that you can see. This really, any attribute about this item can be a column that you're showing on it. For me, when I run that report after I've set up the columns, I've set this up very much to be kind of a replenishment guide for me. So I'm looking at item basic detail, but I'm also looking at my location, the status that it's active versus inactive, how many my min-maxes that I've set, minimum quantity, maximum quantity, what I have on hand, what's committed, and from that committed, how many of them are on order or on layaway, therefore what's available, anything on special order or back order, and my net quantity available. It's just a great way to see your data lined up. And what I love about View is if you don't care about some of these columns, it takes you a second to get rid of them. We'll go through some of that skill set in a second. I'm going to, in fact, let me bounce over to the demo and just show you something real quick with that. Again, trying to give you key tools. So if I go into inventory and views, and I look at that inventory detail, it's set up the same way I kind of showed you here. Of course, just like I did before, you could customize this and add the additional parameters and filters. But on the view part here, if you right button click in any of these columns, you'll see the column designer pop up. And this allows me to kind of look at all the different columns of data that I could put in and move them over to what I'm showing. It really lets you customize this. So if the location didn't really matter, I could remove that column and hit OK, and suddenly that column doesn't appear anymore. This allows you to put things in whatever order and with whatever relevant detail and really lets you tailor the view. And there's one thing about views you have to remember. In Counterpoint, you set a configuration for how many records show on a view. So in other words, when I do any kind of query and I'm viewing the results, I want the system to be really fast, so maybe I set it to only show 200 records. You need to know that it's only showing 200 records then. And you can either increase that number if you expect to use views for more than 200 records at a time, or really use your filters to narrow the results down so that you're only looking at 200 at a time. The more views you're showing in a query, the more the more time it takes for the system to run that and render that query on the screen. So you want to keep your system fast. All right, we're going to talk about our next topic, which is business information. And so very recently, we started working with Microsoft Power BI. It's a business information tool. And the whole idea of Power BI is to show your data visually. It lets you kind of see it. For people who are visual learners and numbers intimidate them and they can't see patterns on a spreadsheet, seeing things in a chart or graph, much easier to kind of understand, number one, what's going well, but also what might be wrong with your system or with the way people are entering data. It's just a great way to see that. Microsoft Power BI basically works like this. Your data comes from the system and goes up to a cloud, an Azure cloud that Microsoft maintains. We create that connection. And then there are dashboards that show you specific ways to look at your data. And we'll give you some examples of that. We're going to open them up on the screen right now to actually show you some real live data. So this is an example of a dashboard in Power BI. This is actually pulling real information from one of our store customers, showing real time. So when I look at their day today, they're having a good day. They've done 94 tickets. The average ticket is $201. This is a sporting goods gun store. The nice thing about Power BI is everything is visual and everything can be configured. So for example, in this particular store, they've got two retail segments and an online version. Well, if I didn't want to look at online sales, I could just unclick that. It quickly adapts and shows me their in-store transactions as opposed to the full business. If I only wanted to look at online, I could show that just as well. Again, it's visual. So when you're looking week by week, you can see patterns. You can see trends in your data. If I go to the year-to-date analysis, this is a great way to kind of see certain metrics like volume, gross margin dollars, average sale, customer count. I'm seeing these year over year. And again, just to show you the power of a picture, you know, it looks like we're having a little hard time with our volumes down every month. June's, of course, early in the month, so it's too early to tell. But we did pick back up in May. If I look at my customer count, I'm a little bit down each month. But you know what? We're not turning on the e-commerce side. So let's look at their web business and watch what happens. They're having a great year, in fact, and their sales have been through the roof, and you can tell exactly when e-commerce picked up. But even before that, their e-commerce business has ended up being a really dramatic impact on their sales volume. It's just the power of a picture. The nice thing about Power BI is that it is easy to create new visualizations. We have people on our team that can custom create a visualization for you. We have you know, anyone who can work in BI can use your data and create visualizations. And there's all kinds, if you just search on the web for Power BI, you see all kinds of ways that people see these dashboards. And the best thing, you can access this on your mobile phone, so you can see your data wherever you are in real time.
Yeah, it's really pretty incredible, Andy. I think that how it will reformat what we're seeing on the desktop so that it's readable and understandable even on a small phone, and that you can just pull this data up anytime, anywhere. Cool stuff.
Yeah, if I just wanted to look at cameras sold, for example, it'll report and filter this out and give you data just on cameras. I mean, it becomes extremely flexible for you to kind of know exactly what's going on in your business. All right. That was our Power BI demo. Let's talk about automated report generation. So I'll mention, by the way, if anybody has questions, you have anything that you want to ask about, please feel free to do that. Just go down to the bottom of the screen, type in a question in the Q&A. We're almost wrapped up and we'll have time to address some of those questions shortly. The last thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, people say reports are great. I have these reports that I like to run, but I have to go every Friday and run that report and then email it to everyone. Well, there's a tool that you can get that would automatically allow your system to generate reports and distribute them to a list of recipients. For some of our larger customers, they definitely use this all the time. It basically is an add-on to Crystal Reports that automatically generates and distributes that report. You have to configure each report that's being generated that way, so there's a little bit of programming time involved in creating and setting up each report, and that really depends on the complexity of the report. But once it's set up, it's a kind of set it and forget it thing. Every Friday afternoon, you get a report in your inbox for that week's sales. So it's a very nice way to automate some of the report generation process. There's other benefits to that tool. For example, it'll automatically send purchase orders to your vendors when you post the purchase order. It's just nice to have some of those functionalities. If you're interested in that functionality, certainly contact us at rapidcares@rapidpos.com, and we can talk to you about how you might add that to your system. And with that, I am going to turn it over to questions, and I don't have any questions in yet, but I encourage anyone to ask them. I'll actually ask a question for Bart. Bart, are there certain reports that you kind of would characterize as hard to find, like something customers often ask for? I know you've talked about a lot of different reports, but something maybe even more obscure that you think might really help a customer solve a specific business. Just give us an example.
Yeah, well, one of the things we didn't mention in our presentation thus far is using the little search feature that's at the top of the Counterpoint window to be able to find it. So you may not, you know what you want to see is a receivings report, or maybe you want to see an inventory adjustment report, and rather, but you don't know where it is. Well, just click on this little search button and start typing in inventory, or start typing in adjustment. And you can see in the reports, in the reports section, if we scroll down just a little bit, all of the different reports that have the word adjustment in it. And so when you can't remember that obscure report that you're hunting, I think that's one of the best ways to go find it.
Perfect. We got, thank you for that. We got a question as far as Power BI. How did they go about setting that up? They've been wanting to use a dashboard and haven't been able to. Yeah, dashboard in Counterpoint is really a fairly kind of dated and difficult tool to use, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of opted for Power BI. It's just much more flexible. If you're interested in getting this, actually just, I'll follow up with you. I have your contact from the question, and I'll talk to you about what we need to do to get that set up in your system. It's not very hard, and it's walk you through the standard dashboards that we have and talk about whether you want to do anything in addition to that.
Question.
Any other questions?
I guess we're ready to wrap it up.
Hey, that's perfect. We're a little bit early, and we want to thank everybody for coming. Let's talk about next steps. And I'm just going to go back to our...
Perfect. So next steps that we've come up for you guys. First, rewatch the webinar that we delivered 4 weeks ago. You keep hearing me say this merchandise analysis report is the most important. Spend some time with that report and understand what it can do for you. The next thing is that practice the fundamental skills that we've described in this webinar. If you've always been running without setting filters, start setting some filters to so that you can really narrow in on a specific category, a specific store, a specific set of items, and start saving. If you've been resetting, find yourself frustrated because every time you enter a report, you need to reset the parameters. Start saving parameters. You can save an unlimited number of parameters, and so do that, and for sure mark your favorites so that they're always sitting there right in front of you. So those are the fundamental skills that Andy went over. Rewatch this webinar and make sure that you can practice all of those fundamental skills. And then as we said, we can take your reporting to the next level. There is 200 reports. There is a lot in Counterpoint. But if you need some one-on-one training and reports, let us help you. You can engage us to help you with that. If you need a report customized, that's something that we can do for you as well. Add a column, take a column away, or we need a whole brand new report because it doesn't show exactly what you want to see. And of course, Sandy talked about the automated and emailing of reports. That's a little add-on component that we can put on, fairly affordable, and get that going. And then the reporting on your phone with Power BI is the future. It's incredible. It requires some Microsoft technologies that you have to license that are on a subscription basis. But we think that a lot of our clients are going to love the capability that they get there. So just send an email to rapidcares@rapidpos.com if you're interested in any of those extras, and we'll be more than happy to help you out.
Okay, and Bart, while we were going through next steps, we just got a couple of other questions. One person asked, Counterpoint University, can we give the email address for that? It's actually counterpointuniversity.com. So if you just type that in, it'll find that's Rapid training site. We have videos there for different things. We have a copy of all of the webinars we've been doing here. It's a great site to use for refreshing your skills in different areas, but we do have the reports handbook posted there as well. Counterpointuniversity.com. I'll include that link when I send out the information about this webinar. I'll include that reference so you have it there as well. We had another question, can we edit report columns? And so I want to clarify and show what we can do, and hopefully that addresses the question. And I'll ask the person who asked if this doesn't answer your question, let's follow up. But for this one, I'm actually going to jump in and look at the inventory reports, and I'll look at merchandise analysis because it's got a lot of columns that you can show on it. So when somebody says edit the columns, I'm assuming what you mean by that is selecting the columns that you see. So right here in this report, I'm showing these 6 columns of information. On the left here, would be all of the possible columns you can see. And in merchandise analysis, they actually do this in 2 tiers. This is kind of the standard information that most people want, but then it can go crazy and show this is all the different columns of information that you could possibly show on this one report. It kind of gets a little crazy, theoretical sales and that kind of thing. So when you're asking if you can edit these, if I understood your question, let's say I just wanted to add cost of all taxes, or I'm sorry, cost of all transactions, or average cost average balance and cost ending balance. If you wanted to show those on, you're just adding them here, and then you can move them up or down to put in the order, or you can decide you want to take that one off and you want to move this one up. So you're basically setting the order here. What you put in here in order will be how the columns appear across the page. So in this case now we're 8 columns out of 10. Remember when I was giving you my, my recommendation, I was saying try to keep it to 7, so I just did that. But I'll preview this report real quick for you just so you can see it's got those different columns now showing across.
I think something important to add is that ability to add columns isn't available on every single report. It's available on the biggest ones, the critical ones. So flash sales, by group, merchandise analysis, all of those have this add columns, but don't expect it to be present on all 200.
So in some, and that's a really good point, Bart. In some things, the columns that you can share, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the columns that you can do are much more limited. If I look at sales history, for example, the sales analysis by group report is a really good one to use as an example there. The columns that are available are much more limited because it's really just reporting about sales information, not inventory information. So it's still considerable, but not anywhere near as comprehensive as the inventory report. So what often happens with people is they really like this report, but there's that one more column of data they wish they had. And that's when you kind of have to jump out of the standard reports and ask for a custom report. The customization in that case might just be adding that one column, so it's not significant, but it is just something that you're not going to get using the standard available tools. Someone asked a question, their business day extends beyond midnight. How do you make sure that when viewing data based on the business day, not a physical 24-hour day? Bart, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, and it's complicated. It's complicated. So if your store is open 24 hours, you might know when you post a drawer, you have the option to say use ticket date, or you can plug in a date that you want. And so if you want to control the date into which sales report, then that would be instead of clicking use ticket date, you would want to be able to say this is the exact date that I want to use. We generally don't recommend doing that except if you're a 24-hour store because it's so easy to make a mistake and put the wrong date in there, and then you've got sales reporting to something that you didn't intend whatsoever. But that would be the approach to achieve what you want to.
All right. Well, listen, everybody, thank you again for joining us. Certainly follow up with questions to rapidcares@rapidpos.com if there's something more that you want to follow up or engage us on. And we look forward, we'll be announcing future webinars. This is the end of our first series of 5, but we're looking at now what we do next and what a good cadence for those would be. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.